Welcome back, Cover One Draft Weekly. John Helmkamp, my buddy Daniel Harms, and a very special guest by the name of Jamarcus Russell, who ironically looks nothing like Jamarcus Russell. It's the incomparable Dave Dameshek joining us here today. How are you, Dave?
I'm better for your company. It's a pleasure. John, I've been following you on social media for a number of years now.
God, why?
And enjoy it. I mean, I listen. Yeah, maybe by the end of this show, I can multitask. And while we're talking, I'll go on to all social media and unfollow you if that would make you. Here's my suggestion for you. I want you guys to cook up an a cappella theme song. But every show starts with the two of you guys belting it out to show how much you love football. That's all it has to be about. It's like, football, we love it, whatever. And then like the show starts. Now it has a vibe, right?
Well, I'm just going to clip that audio that you just sang, and I'm just going to upload it as an audio clip and play it at the start of the next episode.
Football, we love it.
It's perfect.
Gorgeous. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Might need a better quality recording of that later. But thanks so much for joining us. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to sit down with you. Been following your content for a long time. Back in the NFL Network fantasy football days with Adam Rank, who's also become a pretty decent friend of mine over the years, which has been really cool. The Back to the Future segment, the Sheck Report, all the things. It's been a lot of fun. What was that era like working with he and Fabiano and all those other degenerates and just getting to have so much fun on a day-to-day?
Well, it was in hindsight, obviously it was great. The short answer is getting to flap my gums about football and sports is always something that I love doing, of course, and appreciate getting another season to be able to do it. And so when they were putting a fantasy show together, I was contacted by somebody. Actually, the guy who hit me up was coincidentally, this is an irony, but this is from the NFL. His name was Tom Brady. Still is, but it's not that Tom Brady. But he was an executive over there at the NFL who reached out to me. But yeah, it was just like a Sunday morning digital show for 90 minutes, and then very quickly it caught on. And so it was fun in those first few years when you could feel, wow, this is getting big. And the NFL, what's funny in hindsight is that they were kind of like a year 3 behind the competitors, or partners or whatever, ESPN, CBS, and otherwise. They didn't fully jump into fantasy. They didn't know if the football audience cared about it. And so they sort of waited out to see how the market reacted to it. It's very similar to what has been with gambling over the last few years. Now that it was like, yeah, we're not going to embrace that. Now they're in. Witness, I don't know if you heard, but the last Super Bowl was in Vegas. So I think that's a pretty decent indication that they now do embrace gambling.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch. Back then, I think it was ESPN and Yahoo were kind of two of the first ones that really started going in on the content side of fantasy sports. CBS has been doing fantasy like as a platform forever, but watching kind of Matthew Berry start taking off and stuff like that, and then NFL still running strong with it. Rank is still over there doing his thing along with Marcus Grant and a bunch of other people. One of my good buddies, Matt Okada, actually works in the NFL fantasy department also down there in Inglewood. He's got a horrible apartment. I don't envy him for that one, being right there next to the stadium. But a super cool period in time and watching that content. As very, very abundantly clear by your background, it's, I don't know, maybe you can tell that you're a Steelers fan. What is a Yinzer? Can you explain what Yinzer is to me? Because I don't know what a Yinzer is.
We don't know.
Well, it comes from Yinzer, comes from the truncated you guys or whatever slang, just as you have y'all down south. Pittsburghers have yins. Yins one go. We could go downtown. The Steelers is in town on he's in town later today. We get down there. We get some beers and sit down and watch the game, dude. That's what we should do. But yeah, that's I guess the long and short
Huh.
of doing that. Yeah.
It's funny. It sounded remarkably similar to a Chicago accent. Basically, a bunch of people
Ah,
that drink a lot of beer and like to go hang out and watch their local hometown boys down there at the
it's
yard.
funny. Chicago is I got that
Mm.
that you know. I find that unattractive. The Boston accent is maybe worse than Chicago, and I got to say I love all things Pittsburgh, but the worst thing about it is the accent. And I disliked it so much when I was a teenager or going into, my 20s or whatever, that I sort of forced myself not to have it because my mom, she got it. And a lot of people in my family got it. And so I was like, I don't want to have no Pittsburgh accent. And so I forced myself not to have one. And what it yielded was this weird accent that isn't a Pittsburgh accent, but confuses people to this very day.
I'm
I
sure you
don't
get a
know
lot
what
of
it
people
is.
that ask you. Yeah, they're like, What's your accent?" You're like, "It's nothing. I made it up. It was to intentionally not be a Yinzer by trade."
Basically, yeah.
So,
And now since I've been in LA, I mean, for a long time now, but at least 8 or 10 people over the years have asked me, are like, "Are you from like Alabama or something?" Like, Alabama? I sound like I'm from the deep South. Boy, Dave's really talked himself into a weird place on the map of the U.S.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about the Steelers, and I don't know if you guys know, but we have an NFL draft coming up in a couple of months. So next week is the NFL Combine, so we got a lot of players coming out, and because you're a Steelers fan, and coming into the season, I was actually kind of high on the Pittsburgh Steelers. There was a lot of talk about, hey, the Steelers could be pretty good, and funny enough, they ended up going to the playoffs. So how do you really feel about this current state of the Steelers as it stands today?
Well, I think there's a really interesting just on face when you look at the two conferences. Baseball had rules that made it so that there was a designated hitter only in the one league, and in the other league the pitchers had to hit. But football just sort of naturally has sort of unfolded in a way over the last decade or so where almost all of the superhero quarterbacks are on one side of the bracket. They're all in the AFC. So the way you approach team building in that conference, at least in this mini era, and things will change. Caleb Williams, it would appear, is going to wind up in Chicago. Drake may wind up in Washington. And so maybe that shifts things to a degree. But as it stands right now, all the superheroes are on the AFC side. So when you talk about the Steelers, you can wring your hands and say, if you're a Steelers fan, how are they ever going to get around these guys? And then my pushback to that is, and maybe I'm trying to talk myself into something and rationalize it, because there is no practical way short of really trading a ton of assets. And by the way, maybe the Steelers will do that. You don't have to buy this thing that everybody attempts to sell, like the Steelers are old school and they don't make moves like that. That's all predicated on stuff that happened literally with decision makers last century, last millennium. And then since then, Kevin Colbert did the bulk of that. Omar Khan's just getting going. You don't know what he's going to do. The notion that the Steelers philosophically don't operate that, I kind of honestly feel like is potentially out the window if they really want to try. Now, I don't, but all that wind up to say, I don't think it's realistic to go from 20 up to say 3 to get Jaden Daniels or Drake May. And I also like when people get cavalier about like, just trade up and get one of those QBs. Like, which one do you want? Like, dude, they got to get one of them. It's like, they're not all the same though. You understand? You understand? It's not like, dude, look, a lot of people in Pittsburgh hit me up during the season. Like, dude, look at Will Levis. That's all the Steelers got to do. They got to go just get a guy like Will Levis in the second round. It's like, I don't know that the circumstances of Will Levis getting to you doesn't equal Michael Penix falling and being like, well, see, if we want to be like the Titans, that's all we have to do. And do we want to be like the Titans anyway? But anyway,
yeah,
that's neither here nor there. To answer your question, I feel like after 7 minutes of babbling from me, I kind of like where they are. And again, you can ascribe this to rationalizing from a Steelers fan, but the Bills have had Josh Allen for a while now. And Lamar Jackson has been in Charm City for a while, and Justin Herbert with the Chargers for a while. None of them beat Patrick Mahomes. They have superhero QBs, and that wasn't enough for them. So maybe zigging against the zag of obsessing over getting that QB. Instead, in this conference, maybe there's something to be said for building at the line of scrimmage. By the way, Omar Khan, one of the first things he did was steal Andy Weidel from the wrong side of Pennsylvania and brought him over to the right side. He's a Pittsburgh guy. Andy Weidel made the Eagles relevant over the last decade by always in those drafts with Roseman and company loading up on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And, that's kind of what they're doing. And you can get very easily distracted by, and Tony Romo and all the talking heads will take you there. They'll make it easy to say, like, just no beating at the end of the day. You just can't beat Patrick Mahomes, Jim. It's like, hey, Patrick Mahomes scored.
Great Romo. Great Romo.
It was great.
That was pretty good, wasn't it?
It was pretty good.
Jim, I love everything.
You gotta sound like you're kind of out of air and tighten the gut a little bit there, Jim. It's good. It's good.
I just think this is great. You can't beat Mahomes, but of course you can beat Mahomes, and Joe Burrow is the kryptonite. But okay, this side of Joe Burrow, a lot of these teams that have built around the QB still, have not been able to do what they built around the QB to do, which is work their way around 15 in the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't feel sad about it. A lot of people are like, oh, you just got a bad, you're in the conference with Patrick Mahomes. What are you going to do? It's like, yeah, I was in a conference with Tom Brady too. And the Dallas Cowboys were in an NFL with the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 70s, and that got in their way from winning Lombardis. And then in the 80s, Brett Favre was in a conference, and in the 90s with Troy Aikman and Joe Montana, and then Steve Young. And that got in the way of his getting some Lombardis. And that's the way the cookie crumbles. There are always going to be good quarterbacks, and now it's the quarterback league. All that said, I get it. Kenny Pickett, 2 years through, is not the difference maker for the team. But Josh Allen didn't make enough of a difference to beat Patrick Mahomes in the divisional round himself. And so I do think that the teams that have taken the best runs at the Chiefs over the last couple of years, the Niners and the Eagles, did it via bully ball, pushing them around a little bit. So that's my long answer to your simple question.
So ironically, you're speaking with a Bills fan, and Daniel is a Chiefs fan.
I mean,
so we have a little bit of a say in this AFC conversation here. I like to tell everybody, in case you didn't know, that I'm a lifelong Bills fan since October. I went through this whole thing where I was picking my future team because I was feeling disenfranchised and floating in the NFL stratosphere, and I decided landing on the Bills after doing a very extensive research project. But
I think Rank did that 10 years ago himself.
When he did.
Oh,
yep, he did. Which is funny because I flipped from the Bears to the Bills. So
wow,
we traded places. But speaking of the Bears and your very obviously not Chicago accent, may I interest you in one Justin Fields? There's been talk about that's been swirling around. You're potentially looking for a difference maker at the quarterback position. He has a sky-high ceiling. It's just the consistency hasn't been there. Do you think that maybe a change of scenery to a situation like Pittsburgh with an established coaching staff and culture and stuff like that could be a kind of bargain bin way of getting a potential top-tier quarterback?
First of all, we fixate on you gotta trade up into the top 5 picks to get one of those QBs or your goose is cooked. And we sell this during the draft process every year. And Matt Miller of ESPN, who knows what he's talking about, said, bottom line, reacting to that Super Bowl, if you don't have Patrick Mahomes or someone who can play on his level, you have no shot. It's like, well, no one's on Patrick Mahomes. It's closer, I think, than a lot of people will sell it. But nevertheless, the results are in. Patrick Mahomes is a tick better than pretty much all the other guys he's playing against the court at QB. So I think with Justin Fields, the thing that the two biggest things he hasn't been very accurate in the NFL, and I don't love that long windup he's got to take to unload it. But he's an imperfect guy, and that's why he imperfect quarterback, but that's why he's available. Presumably, we haven't been told that 100%, but you can pretty much read the tea leaves that and it does make all the sense in the world. If you're the Bears, where they are, it wouldn't make sense for them to pay out Justin Fields when they have the flaws they have with their roster. For the Steelers, and I get the cynicism about, like, I don't see it with this guy. I don't think he's the answer, and you'd have to give up a lot. I don't want to give up a second round pick. Better to give up a third round pick as far as that goes if we have to get Justin Fields. But either way, if you kind of look at this draft, and much can change with these college kids and how they profile a year from now versus now. But the other side of that was 2 years ago now, Spencer Rattler was like, oh man, he's the guy. He's the guy. He's now, almost an afterthought. And now there's a late push. Like, well, kid's got a live arm. That Gamecock, he's a guy like, yeah. Did we forget about the arc of his 17-year college experience? But anyway, so maybe things can get better for some of the kids out there. But as it stands right now, the 2025 draft is not nearly as good at QB as this one is. And but I do caution everybody, or just encourage you to not have amnesia and look around as we tick through those QBs. Was Jalen Hurts one of the top 5 picks in his draft? Justin Herbert was, what did he go, 6 or wherever he went, but he went behind 2 other quarterbacks. Russell Wilson. I don't know if you heard where Tom Brady was drafted, but it was late. You can tick through all those. So the obsession with, like, if you don't get one of those quarterbacks, and the only way to get one of those quarterbacks is to trade way up to get there, or really stink it up and go 1-16. That's the only way you're ever going to get one of those guys. Ain't necessarily true. 1, 2. If you don't love the crop in this draft and next, look at the free agents right now at QB and look at the ones that are going to be available at this time next year. It ain't great. Kirk Cousins is a nice option, but you are going to have to pay him probably $90 million to get him into your place. Russell Wilson, I do not want. The vibe ain't right. And walking into the Steelers locker room is the guy who's going to make the difference. It has a stink on it now. I think what you do is you flood the zone. If they can keep Mason, then also we're at a point now where, like you say, the combine is on its way, then free agency, then the draft. And so these are all moving parts. We don't know if Mason Rudolph, the Steelers have a better sense than we do right now if Mason Rudolph is going to wind up back with the Steelers. They can read what's going on out there, if it's going to be. And if it is Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, I know a lot of people in Pittsburgh and out are going to say, like, well, they're doomed. They have no chance if that's what they're going to roll with again this year. I would say, well, to your point about where the ceiling is for Justin Fields, it's pretty high. And I think if you have to extend him, not just pick up his 5th-year option, but extend him for 5 years beyond that, then I would not make the deal. But if you can pick up his 5th-year option, you're talking about like $32 or $33 million over 2 years for Pickett and Fields. Well, that's a great deal. Most teams that are contending teams or fancy themselves contenders are paying a lot more than that for one guy over 1 year. If the Steelers can have an advantage created by paying their QB and 2 QBs, that I get the draft pick that they would have to give up is not a small thing, but still you're picking up what I'm laying down. There is an advantage that they would have in the ability to build the rest of the roster out that those teams that are paying 50 something million to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson don't have at this point.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And when you talk about the Bears and Justin Fields, that brings us like to the top of the draft. Like, they obviously have control of what's going to be happening. And with Justin Fields being in that whole realm, I want to get a little insight into what you think the Chicago Bears should do, because obviously they have the number 1 overall pick. If this was what you were going to lay out, what your plan for the Bears and how this draft is going to go, what would you do?
It's funny that there are, and this is the cycle, and it's funny thing. You guys, like I've tried to track it, but you might find it fun. The beats of the draft process every year, and like they hit within like almost the same week every year, and we're in that place now where now we got to start dinging some of these guys. Caleb Williams has been too praised. Now we must chip away at that and create some intrigue that maybe it should be Drake May. Maybe it should be Jaden Daniels over him. They definitely need to take one of those quarterbacks. Justin Fields, where he is, the results are in this millennium. Even in the age of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, half of the quarterbacks who start in Super Bowls over the last 23 years now, this millennium, have been on their rookie contract. Even the great ones. Joe Burrow has been to a Super Bowl, but of course that was in his second season. And if you go through it, as I have, and tick away, you'll find that half of those guys, this is including the era of Tom Brady, as I say, who played until he was in his 50s or whatever he was. He's still skewing that number, and it was half the guys. You want the real deal QB, but you want him on his rookie deal. And if you want as hot a take as I can give about pro football, one that I mean, I can throw out
exactly what I want.
Hot takes that I don't believe. I'd rather have all available quarterbacks starting with this draft down versus Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson in terms of who I think is going to win more Lombardis over the next decade. How say you?
All right, Mike.
Add that up. Add it up. Do it. Everybody is so cavalier. Talk about it again. Here's one of my favorite takes. Jim, Josh got nothing to hang his head about. He's going to be back here. He's going to have other chances. Like, how do you know that, Tony? Like, Patrick Mahomes ain't leaving. Lamar Jackson's sticking around. And guess what? Joe Burrow's coming back next year. This idea that like you're entitled to because of individual greatness, a Lombardi. I know that Dan Marino is the guy who's always cited. I hereby predict that he's going to have a whole bunch of company in a decade. At least two of these guys who we swoon over. I just last week did this with Scott Pianowski from Yahoo. And nobody, not nearly enough people weighed in. So I'll thank you guys to do it because I'm vain and I like when people respond to the questions I ask on social media.
Sure.
Go through the next decade. Here's the big thing that happens as they're walking off the field. Like, dude, Josh is going to get it. Lamar is this is a great situation. And the Ravens have nothing to hang their head about. Yes, they do have something to hang their head about. They just devoted a full year of their lives, of their professional lives, to doing this and getting past this team to get to the Super Bowl, and they failed. Of course they should hang their heads. It's not an infinite number of shots they get. Lamar Jackson probably at this point in his career, Josh Allen, those guys probably have 8 to 11 more shots at it, and the older they get, the more it's going to have to be around. They need some help. They're not as dynamic as they used to be. They're already getting to that place, respectively, are those two cats. And Patrick Mahomes is in the way. And then once a decade, something like Joe Flacco's Ravens or Brad Johnson's Bucks are gonna spoil things. And that's one less Lombardi you're going to get. It's the one Lombardi per year QB conundrum. This promising, well, he'll get his, doesn't add up in terms of math. And I hate math. They're only going to give out one at the end of the year. And Patrick Mahomes keeps taking too many of them. So where are these available Lombardis that everybody's going to win multiple Lombardis? It's some weird digital empathy that people attempt as they're like, hey, Bills fans, wild ride this year. Keep your chins up. But why? It's devastating. This is the worst.
There's so much. The Bills went to 4 straight Super Bowls. Like, they know what that's like to just not be able to get it done. And that's why when like Dan Campbell was so with his team afterwards, like, we might not get here again. That's what needs to be said more, because media and the announcers, like you were saying, they're always like, they're too good not to. That's not how the NFL works. unfortunately for everyone else, Patrick Mahomes has been too good for that to not happen. But for a lot of these other teams, don't forget, CJ Stroud's coming too. He's there.
Mhm.
Their defense is going to get better. Their offensive line is going to get better. They're all going to collectively get better. These teams, man, you got to find ways to get out of their own way at times. And I know I'm not trying to bring this Chiefs centric, but this was the worst Chiefs team.
Sure.
It's the worst Chiefs team that Patrick Mahomes has had. Okay.
I agree. Well,
offensively,
it's funny you say that.
Offensively,
what I said 3 years ago is that I was making the same doom and gloom talk. So don't resent me too much, John. About because I said that, and then they traded. This is before they traded Tyreek Hill. I said, like, it's not to say Patrick Mahomes is never going to win another Lombardi because he's great, but he's already been on the best team he's ever going to be on. The thing that the Bills have to do, which is super easy to float out there, and the Ravens need to do this and so on, is they need to pull a straight flush like the Chiefs just have done in the last couple years with their drafts, especially on defense. Like that, how can we get past the Bills? Forget the swooning, genuflection, the Patrick Mahomes. He's awesome and all that. But again, one touchdown against that Niners defense. It's not like he was the difference. He made some special plays. And believe me, I've watched Josh Allen make some special plays that feel like, oh, it was so close. But in the last minute, 17 steps up and is like, oh, yeah. I mean, like that wasn't available to him all game. But when they had to have it, Josh Allen did it. And that's the difference between him and remember that Frozen game in Buffalo 2 Decembers ago against Miami? It was like, well, they have no chance. Tua keeps getting hurt. And then they had him on the ropes. I'm not talking about the Skylar Thompson playoff game. I'm talking about the Tua game up there.
Yeah.
Those Florida boys going to fly up to snowy Buffalo and compete with the Bills, please.
Yeah.
And they were hanging with them. But I remember in the last minute, Josh Allen snapped off a couple of runs and a big time crazy throw. And that was the difference. And so maybe you can delude yourself into thinking, or maybe I'm deluding myself into thinking, like, they can get by zigging against the Chiefs zag. Maybe they can't. But I also know that based on the evidence that we've seen, that the Bills method hasn't worked. I mean, it's gotten closer than it has the Steelers, but it hasn't worked out. And now they're into Josh Allen, as that number's really going to get heavy in terms of salary cap, and the percentage that one cat is going to suck up is going to make it harder to like. And the thing, I know we're not, nobody asked about the Bills, and now I'm just punishing you, John. But
sure.
The other thing that sucks, the other thing is really in their way is that Stephon Diggs contract. I don't know how they're getting out from under that thing, but like with those two things on the books, I don't know how that team gets better. And they weren't great this year. They were Josh Allen. They were Josh Allen, and at times a real heavy pass rush. And that was what made that Bills team, look like that. Maybe they could, they got a puncher's chance against Mahomes. I didn't buy the Bills all season long. But by the way, to answer the question on the Bears, it's a different premise. Like, you're going to have an edge, you would think, as long as Caleb Williams, and keep in mind, it's a 60-40 proposition for all the people like, you got to get this guy. He can't miss. It's 60-40. The guys spend their entire lives breaking down tape, get it right, a little bit more than half the time, whether they're on an NFL team in the scouting department or they're on TV talking about it. The best do it, like I say, a little bit more than 50% accurately. But okay, let's assume they get Caleb Williams right. Well, now they have a huge advantage in the NFC that because they're just are not those. So by year 2, give them another weapon and just create what has not existed in Chicago. I know Bears fans. I lived in Chicago for a decade.
So maybe you do have some Chicago accent in you.
I got the Chicago up in the north side.
North side. I love that.
I feel like become this. The defense is already sound. So if it breaks so that they could get, let's say, Caleb Williams, and I don't think it's going to work out for them to get Marv Harrison, but if they can get a weapon like that, and the pieces from last year plus DJ Moore and Johnson, I mean, you're getting to in a soft conference, you're getting to a team that is
Mhm.
going to be intriguing as soon as next year, as soon as autumn of this year. But yeah, I think,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you take a quarterback, you move Justin Fields, and basically also leverage it. If he remember the noise about 3 weeks ago was that he kind of preferred DC. Okay, then hold DC hostage with that. Make them trade to get the first overall pick, make them move up by one. They're going to have to trade you something legitimate. They're going to have to give you a legit pick to make that move. So add even more draft picks to the load and really build it up around Caleb Williams. I don't think that team's that far away.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. And I've always been a huge Justin Fields supporter. It's funny, you were talking earlier about the pre-draft process and how we go through these ebbs and these flows and how you start knocking on people and stuff like that. I remember all the pre-draft slander that came out about Justin Fields. I was up in arms. I was so mad. I remember that there was a clip or a certain commentator that I won't name was saying that Fields wasn't a hard worker or it wasn't a good leader. And I was just like, what the are you talking about? And then Ryan Day the next day comes out and he's like, no, Fields is the consummate pro. So I've always been like in Fields camp, and like that outraged me to no end. And then he did slide on draft day, and I was so mad. I was living in downtown Chicago in River North at the time when I was again drifting between football teams, and they traded up and they took Fields, the guy that I'd been banging the table for all off season. When I was in downtown, I heard my building shake when Justin Fields was drafted. And I was like, okay, bear down. Let's go. I'm in on Chicago. Didn't last. But anyways, it's hard for me as a avid Justin Fields advocate to sit back and say, no, the right thing strategically to do is to move on from Justin, because I still believe that he does have a ton of upside. I still believe that he can be a good NFL quarterback. I think that there's many teams around the league that would provide him with maybe a more established situation to go to that also still need a quarterback right now that could give him a shot at kind of just a change of scenery, revamping things, and go from there. He's a Georgia kid. What if he goes back to Atlanta? Homecoming for him.
That makes sense. For and obviously they're human beings. And so if you're Caleb Williams and you're 21 or 22, whatever he is, and he's like, I grew up in Washington, D.C. What a thrill it would be to get to do it for the local football collective. Then that's something. And if Justin Fields pines to do that, but if he's looking at football situation, I do think Atlanta is a good one. I think that the optimal guy for them is Russell Wilson. They need they have young talent in there, and I don't think and they've made it pretty clear that they are anxious to get a QB this year. I don't know. Maybe they could move up and get one of those big three. And if they do, then that's one way to go. And with Fields, I think if you put him in Pittsburgh or a team that's a little further along than where the Falcons are, yes, the Falcons present as a dynamic team in fantasy, but they're not structured in such a way that they're going to, in real football, take things over in 2024. Pittsburgh has a chance to be real good, and it's very strange to me. I'm talking about this year. They the asterisk is obviously a QB. I still like them, and people always tell me, people always accuse me of being such a homer, except that in 12 years or 13 years, I can't remember how long it's been, I haven't missed the Steelers' final record by more than a game. When I predict it. So that includes 8-8s and some bum years and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like I'm always pie in the sky about what I think is going to be. I mean, this team just won 10 games a couple of weeks ago, just got to 10 and made it to the playoffs. There's zero reason for the cynicism. Like they're going to go 8-1 this year. They're going to be bad. There's no indication that would be the case. They're going to have a relatively favorable schedule. They are, I think, going to continue what I mentioned, that Weidl philosophy of building up at the line of scrimmage. And all that being said, it wouldn't completely floor me if you heard, wait, Khan did what? They traded all the way up to 2 to get Jaden Daniels. I know that's highly unlikely. I am not predicting that that's going to happen. But the idea that that's not something the Steelers have ever done, therefore it's not something they'll do now, is stinking thinking. That's owed to something attached to former regimes. And, well, the Rooney family is still there. Okay, Art 2 is in charge now. Before that, Dan was in charge. And before that, Art was in charge. They're different human beings operating in different generations with different rules in place and all that sort of thing. But for the Bears fan out there, another interesting year awaits. But man, that division is going to be rough this coming season, right? Assuming that Kirk Cousins does wind up back in Minnesota, which I think he will.
Yeah, Kirk comes back. The Lions are legit and just
are they
still young.
The Lions are going to fall off a cliff, obviously.
No,
right? The Packers should be a little bit better. So
Packers look like they're improving. Jordan Love's second half of the season looked really good. I think that the Chicagoans are pretty pissed off watching Jordan Love's second half of the season. Like, really, you guys did it again. You really went from quarterback to quarterback to quarterback with no gap. I think it's rough. It's rough there in Chicagoland right now.
Just remember what I said 5 years ago now, and now it has 5 years tacked on to whatever the number was then. I think what has it been, 31, 32 years or something like 33 years where they have never had. Now, Jordan Love, okay, he's on his way, he's ascendant, but he's not there yet. But prior to Jordan Love, the Packers never had worse than the third or fourth best QB in all of football. Same number of Lombardis as Joe Flacco and Trent Dilfer delivered to Baltimore. So that should make you feel better.
That's a good point.
That's a beautiful. I think it's a beautiful nugget to end it on. It's a great stat there. Thank you so much for joining us, Dave. I really appreciate the time. It was great. Love to have you back. Hey, the draft is in. What's my countdown say? 62 days. It's going to be here really fast. So maybe we can talk shop a little bit after the draft and see if Pittsburgh pulled off a crazy trade to get the quarterback of the future. If they're riding with the same duo, and 3/4 of Steelers fans are going to be pissed off going into next year.
Or maybe Justin Fields is the new Buffalo Bills starting quarterback when Josh Allen is traded. I don't know what's going to happen in either.
No one does. Nope. unless you have a copy of the script, in which case send it over.
I got to get those scripts. I know journalism. I always say that when people always are like, man, don't you know that the news is fake? That they're just like, it's like, man, I went to a pretty good journalism school. And then I've worked in the media in some way or the other for the last 25 years. If nothing else, my feelings are hurt that no one's looped me in on the big scheme. No one pulls me aside and is like, hey, Dave, just so you know, here's what we're doing as media. We're lying to the American people about this, that, and the other. Why don't I get kissed in? When's it my turn?
If anyone's got a plug, it's going to be Adam Rank. So feel free to give him a text and we'll see if we can get the plug there. Thanks so much for joining us. This again was Cover One Draft Weekly. John Helmkamp, Daniel Harms, joined by the incredible Jamarcus Russell. Thank you for taking the time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Drank.